What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. This is TWA Motorsports, and today we are going to be getting the Camaro back running. Now, you can see that I'm doing some stuff. I'm going to be doing this off camera. I'm taking the headers off, and the reason being is they just hang way too low. I'm going to put stock manifolds back on it. I'm not going to bore you guys with that because you have seen me do that in other videos. When I do put a set of headers on this, I will obviously show you guys that method as well as removing the air injection and all that. But today we are going to focus on getting the power steering pump and the rack back into place, as well as getting the front lowered. So in the last video, obviously, we took all this stuff apart. You can see that I just brushed up on the fender wells. I painted them with just some flat black. So we are going to be reassembling today. Now, this is going to include putting new ball joints in, upper ball joints, as well as obviously the new rack, the new steering pump, power steering pump, and I've got some new sway bar end links, which I will list all this stuff down in the description. But let's get started. I'm going to start by reassembling the front springs and getting them into place, followed by the spindle, and then we will go on to the rack itself, followed by the power steering pump. So let's get started. I'm going to go grab those uppers. I did respray those as well. I didn't show you guys that on camera, but I did respray those after I got the ball joints out of them. We are going to go ahead and keep the stock lower ball joints, but like I said, let's go grab this upper, reassemble those. So we have to assemble the front, and so we have these used struts I got from a buddy of mine. Now, like I said, we're going to be lowering it at the same time. These are some Bilstein shocks, and I will list this down below. You can find these used. I also got used springs, so I will list both these. They actually don't make these springs anymore, I don't believe. I'm not even sure how much it lowers it. I think around an inch, but BMR makes a really good spring, and as you guys know, I chopped them on the Trans Am until I went to coilovers. But you can chop them. I would recommend getting a different strut if you cut your stock springs, and I will list a link to that video up above. But we need to reassemble, so really all there is to that is put your old bump stop on. This is just a cup to keep things from getting gross, and then we put the strut on. The small side does go to the top, as you can see, and we just need to use our strut compressor to compress this down. And then there's one other piece. It's a rubber isolator that goes up top, and I also cleaned all this up, guys, so take your time and clean this up before you put it back together. But we need to compress this strut a little bit, and then we'll be able to put the nut on the top, and this one will be complete. Once we have the strut assembled, I grabbed the upper A-arm, and there is a rubber isolator that snaps in here, and I also cleaned those up really well. There's pieces of rubber, and generally they're in pretty good shape. The top of the struts are sometimes rough. You can see the rust that I knocked off, and it's still kind of rusty, but we put this on the top, and then we will get it into the car, which is just the reverse process of what I showed you guys when I was disassembling it. And I'm going to go ahead and put these in without the ball joints in, and the reason being is I think it'll be easier. Something's holding it while I'm trying to put these upper ball joints in. So I'm going to move this into place, get these two nuts just kind of snugged up top, and then we will move on to putting that ball joint into place. Now we've got the this just snugged up top. I will torque these once it's down on the ground, but one of the things a lot of people do, guys, is they switch these from side to side to make it a little bit easier. You'll be able to get a wrench on the one that's underneath the master cylinder. That way you don't have to remove the master every time, but that's what I did. And so we're going to put that other 13 millimeter that was up top here on the other side. So, and it'll be more symmetrical, which, you know, I'm kind of picky. So anyway, this is in place. Now we're going to go grab the new ball joint and get it into place. Now the cool thing is these just bolt into place, and like I said, I wanted it to be stationary, or more so than just laying on the ground before I put it in. So I'm going to go grab it, and we'll show you what the process is of putting it in. Now what I bought was it's a Moog part number, which I will list down below, but it is called a problem solver U-joint, and the reason, or a ball joint, because if the hole that you take the old ball joint out is a little too big or is messed up from taking it out, this covers that gap. So when I put this in, it was loose, so I am going to be using this in order to get this into place. And then all we have to do is just literally use the bolts. Of course, make sure you put your grease zerd in, but we just have to put the bolts in and the nut on the top side. So pretty easy process, and then we will move on to the spindle. once you get these into place, make sure you put your boot on, of course, because obviously you need that to keep the grease in where it needs to go. But we need to tighten these down, and they get torqued, the nut, not the bolt that goes through, but the nut up top gets torqued to 12 foot-pounds. Once we have the strut and spring installed, and our ball joint all tightened up top, we are ready to put the spindle back into place. Now, I did go ahead and respray the spindles, and so they're going to look a lot nicer than what they did, but we're going to get it into place, get it torqued down, and then we're going to be pretty close as far, other than putting the brakes back on, which is relatively simple. But once we get the brakes on, then we'll move in and work on the rack and the actual power steering pump. Once you got that spindle into place, then you need to torque the bottom one to 81 foot-pounds and the top one to 39 foot-pounds. Kind of odd, 81 and 39, but that's what GM calls for. Now, you may have to swing it a little bit further to line up your castle nut so you can get your cotter keys in, but we're going to go ahead and torque them down and get our cotter keys into place, and then obviously the tie rod will work on as we get the steering rack back into place. But once we do that, I'm going to go ahead and whip the brakes back on, and like I said, then we'll move into the center. Well, we've got all the brake together, and so you need to torque down your brake, the caliper mounting bolt, so the bracket itself, that gets 74 foot-pounds. That's an 18 millimeter. My phone's going off, that sucks. And then the 13 millimeter, or the 12 millimeter, the guide pins here, those go to 37. And then your bottom strut bolts, they go to 37, and then the ones up top go to 32. Right now I have my son out there cleaning up the inner fenders, the fender liners, but we are ready to put the rack into place. So I went ahead and assembled the grease certs on the new tie rod ends, which I will also list down below. These Moog tie rod ends are just my favorite. To me, Moog's one of the best brands you can buy, and anything that comes with a grease cert is better than one that doesn't. So we're going to thread these on, and we're going to try to be kind of equal on both sides as we're threading them on, and then we're going to get this rack into place. We have to put the bushing right here. Put the rack into place, go ahead and get it bolted down. Now that torques down to 80 foot-pounds. I'm going to go ahead and torque it into place, and then we will move on to putting the actual power steering pump and the new, actually I got to put a new line on the power steering pump. You guys know I messed that one up. So let's get these threaded on the ends and then into the car. Well, I tried to clean off the bottom of this as much as possible, but it is looking better. So we're going to try to thread this thing into place, and hopefully it goes. Shouldn't be too bad. So at this point, we need to do a couple things. First of all, we need to torque these down to 80 foot-pounds. This black cover goes on the top where the actual steering shaft comes in, and that just keeps dirt and debris out of it, so it's a good idea to put it back into place if you didn't lose it. If you did, I'm not sure that it's a big deal, but we're going to go ahead and torque these. And it looks like I'm getting lucky that the nut is not moving on the top. Once we do this, then we'll go out on the outside and hook up the tie rod ends. We're going to go ahead and put our tie rod end into place, and it gets torqued to 35 foot-pounds. Sorry guys, I'm moving the camera as I'm doing this, but anyway, this gets torqued to 35 foot-pounds. Now you're going to have to swing it maybe an additional sixth of a swing or so to get the castle nut to line up to put the cotter key in. So we're going to go ahead and put both sides in, and I kind of threaded these out maybe with an inch showing of thread, and so we'll obviously make some adjustments before we head to the alignment shop. But let's torque this down, and then we'll move back into the inside. I think I'm going to go ahead and hook up the steering column just because it's a little easier without the lines in the way. Now that we have the tie rod ends hooked up, and make sure you put grease in those, don't forget to do that, but we're going to go ahead and slide the steering shaft into place and torque down the 11 millimeter. Now I'm going to go ahead and torque the bottom one, and I'm also going to put in the top one. They're going to go to 35 foot-pounds. So at this point, we're ready to put on the new line that I bought, and it goes a certain way. So I've got the reservoir off the pump, but it actually faces like this. This is the front of the vehicle. This turn faces up, so you need to make sure that you put it in that way. Otherwise, it's not going to fit in the car. So we're going to pull this plug out and get this installed. One thing you need to make sure that you do is you put these green O-rings on that come with the kit. Otherwise, you may have a leak, so just make sure that you get those into place, and that is on both sides. So you got 2 of them that come with the new line. So now that we have this tightened down the correct angle, we need to put the reservoir back on top. Now there is an O-ring in here as well, and all you have to do is just push this back into place, and it sets pretty snug, and then you put these back on that I took off in the last video to get this thing separated. They just push on. You can just tap them on with a mallet, and they are side specific apparently. Yeah. So tap those into place, and we'll get the actual bracket bolted down to it, and we'll be ready to put it back in the car. Well, we have the tank on. One thing you want to make sure of before you bolt this down, the actual pump to the bracket, is you put this bolt in the back. Otherwise, once you get the pump on, you're not going to be able to do that. So you can get the other ones in, but that one you will not be able to get in. So make sure you do that. Now we just need to put these back into place, get this thing snug down and into the car. So I loosely fit the line on. Now I'm bypassing the this line used to go into your power steering cooler into your radiator for a power steering cooler. Mine has been bypassed. The guy before had put a basically a barb fitting in between the two and connected them, and so you don't have to do that. You can actually, it's long enough that you can reach it with the bottom section. So I'm kind of worried about this. Looks like it might leak, so I loosely fit that on there, but we're going to tighten that up once it's in the car and I get the line around to where it needs to be. But we're going to go ahead and press the pulley back on, and it's kind of the reverse process really of how we took it off in the last video. But you're just going to thread this in, and it pulls it on as you're going. Well, I've got the lines threaded in and just snugged up. You don't want to get crazy tightening these. You just want to get them nice and snug, and they are in place. Now I did have to trim because I cut out the old cooler, or the power steering cooler, or I would call it power steering heater, or a good way to mix your antifreeze and power steering fluid. Anyway, like I said, this was bypassed before, but he just looped those together and I didn't really like that, so I just trimmed off the line a little shorter and bolted it back up. Because it's a low pressure side, you don't have to worry a whole lot about it. You have gobs of room, so just cut that off, and you can see it running right here up to the bottom of the reservoir. So now all we need to do is bolt our power steering pump back into place, and then we'll be able to fill it up, and hopefully we don't have any leaks. Well guys, now we have the pump all tightened back up, we have the belt back on, we have, as you can see, all the lid and accessories put back in. I did go ahead and I tried to film this, but for some reason all my audio was gone. But I did put the new sway bar end links in. Those are Moog parts, and kind of how those tighten down is you just sandwich them down until you can't spin this center section, and then I go a little bit past that. So those are replacements. I will list those in the description down below. But before we put the inner fender liner back in, or the wheels on, I am going to bleed the system. Now I did go ahead and put a couple, probably a little over 12 ounces in, and I am using Royal Purple as far as power steering fluid, but I did put about one of those bottles in, and until it registered on the add mark, right above the add and right below the cold. Now The procedure that Turn 1 recommends is completely different than what GM says. Now, GM says put a vacuum cap on this. That would be great. I do have a Mighty Vac, but I do not have a cap that'll fit that. So we're going to use the Turn 1 method, which, if you guys don't know who they are, I will list their info below as well. They sell the neat little power steering pulleys that you can actually take the pump off without having to remove the pulley, which is really nice, and I probably should have done that, but they were out of stock. So their procedure says that we take the cap off. You spin the wheel back and forth with the engine off until you don't see any bubbles in the reservoir, and you're also trying to keep it full at the same time. So I'm going to have my son come out and turn the wheel back and forth while I'm watching this. Now, once we do that and you quit seeing bubbles, then we put the we start the engine still with the cap off, and we're making sure that it doesn't go dry. We're going to turn it back and forth several times as well, and you want to make sure when you're turning it you're not hanging on the lock, especially when it's started, because that's really hard on the pump. So just go to lock and then right back to the other way. Just don't stay on the lock position. So that's what our next step is, guys. Sorry I couldn't show you all this stuff going together, but I had it on video. I just didn't have any audio. It's random when I turn my GoPro on that it just doesn't film sound for some reason. But anyway, I'm going to hop in the car, or have him hop in the car and turn the wheel back and forth. I'm going to attempt to show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. He's in there turning it back and forth. It's going all the way to one lock to the other. Now the car is not running. You see that bubble right there that just came up? You're wanting to go until you don't see any of those. So that's what we're looking for. And we went back and forth probably 10 times so far. We're still getting bubbles. So what we're doing is we're doing this for a little bit. I'm filling it back up, and then we are just repeating this process over and over. Well, we got good news and bad news. So the good news is I started it up, and it looks as though we've got all the bubbles out. I had him turning it back and forth about, I don't know, 10, 15 times. The important thing, like I said, is you don't want to hang on the lock. So when you get to one side, you can still see some of the exhaust burning off. I swapped out the manifolds. I think I told you guys that. But so anyway, we don't hang on the lock when you're on one side or the other. Go there, come right back, and do that until you don't see any bubbles. Now, I didn't see any bubbles. The downside is that I have a little bit of a leak still. So it looks as though, and I don't know that you guys are going to be able to see it, but on the very bottom of my alternator and right here on the ground, that puddle right there is from a small leak in what looks to be like the power steering pump. So the actual, I don't have any leaks on the rack itself, and that's one of the reasons why I put fluid in it. I actually put fluid in it about a week ago just to let it set. So we're going to run it for now and see if it gets worse. Now, if it gets worse, obviously this pump's under warranty. We will take it back off, even though that sucks. But if I do have to take it back off, I'm going to buy a Turn 1 pump. I think it's a better quality pump, and I think that's the route that I will go. So we're going to go ahead and put the inner fenders on, and once we get the inner fenders on, almost tripped on my cord there, we're going to put the wheels back into place, and we're going to take it down the road and see. Actually, we'll probably try to set a spot alignment, but then we will try to take it down the road and maybe see if it improved that situation. The best way to test that is to go back and forth down the road, then we can come back and make sure we don't have any leaks. But the next time you see this car, we will have it down on all fours. Now, I did want to give you guys one more look at the inner fenders. So I just sprayed them with some like semi-gloss. Same thing with the inner fenders here, the removable piece and this here. I sprayed both with that, and of course I used gloss on the upper control arm, and then I tried to clean up the spring and the strut as much as possible. So the brakes look pretty trashy. The calipers definitely need paint, but I thought this made it look a little bit better, and while I was in here I just cleaned it out. So one of those picky things I do. This car is like a complete pile of crap. The other thing is these right here. So I'm trying to not get a glare with my light, but these little push-in pieces, I did have to buy some new ones of those. And these things here, these 7mm, there's 3 of them on each side. Those are about the hardest things you'll ever put in these cars. They don't line up, so you really have to use a light to find the hole and then put them in. It's the only way to do it. Now, they are self-tapping if you want to move them around, but I didn't want a bunch of holes. I wanted them back in the stock location. So use a light to shine in there while you're moving this around. That'll get them lined up. Like I said, it is one of the hardest things you'll do on this car. But I'm going to go ahead and get this wheel on. We're going to take a look at the alignment, try to give it a spot alignment. I have not ran down the jam nut yet because I figured I would have to make some adjustments. So once we get the wheel on, we'll be able to kind of see where it's at and maybe try to put it into somewhat close alignment before we actually take it to the alignment shop. Now, before we set it down, we need to adjust the tie rod a little bit. As you can see, and I don't know if you guys are able to tell, but this wheel is turned out a little ways. So we need to pull that back in. Now, we're not going to be able to get it spot on, but we're going to be able to get it good enough to where it doesn't completely scrub off the tires. Now, these tires suck, so that doesn't really matter. But to get it to the alignment shop, you don't want it crazy out of alignment. You don't want to risk breaking anything. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, all you have to do is under here, you need to spin this inner tie rod, and then once you get it to the point you want, you need to tighten up this jam nut. Now, it depends on which kit you went with as to what size you're going to need. Mine happens to be 7/8 and 1/2 inch on the center. Everything else on this thing is metric, but for some reason this remanufactured rack is standard. So we're going to go ahead and do that and move the wheel back in, and then make sure, guys, that you've greased all your grease certs that you have in place. Now, I did that as I was doing it so I wouldn't forget. And then just torque the wheels. Now, that's something that not a lot of people do, but I am a firm believer in torquing the wheels. Now, it's really hard to tell on these wheels because of the offset, but I've got it as close as I can possibly get it. So all we have to do now is hold this in place while we tighten the jam nut. Now, I did have jack stands under it, so don't freak out. It wasn't just supported by a jack, but I'm hoping that we can get it down and it's not too low that the jack won't come out from under it. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. So it's too low and the jack won't come out from under it. So what we're gonna have to do is lift it back up, and man, it's really low. We're gonna have to lift it back up and put some blocks under the tires that we'll have to drive off of. Now I've got a couple 2x4s that I have cut down, and hopefully that will give us enough room to get the jack out. It's gonna be close. And of course it drags on that bottom piece. Normally, guys, I would be a little more careful, but as you know, this car is not in the greatest of shape. And to be quite honest with you, it ain't gonna hurt it. So, holy cow, that's heavy. I think it's pretty low. And it's gonna look really goofy because the back's not lowered, but let's pull it out and take a look at it. Well, guys, I took it down the road to try to get it to settle, because when you first pull it out, when you let it down, it's obviously not settled. So I drove it around the block a couple times and everything seems to be working out great. So the steering's working, it doesn't seem to be leaking, at least other than that spot that I showed you earlier, and we're going to keep an eye on that. Obviously, that's going to suck if we have to take that pump back off, but if it happens, it happens. There's no leaking in the rack, which is good. So I always forget to take a measurement, but as you can see, it is definitely lower in the front. And I turned the wheel a little bit. I did notice when we were driving down the road, or when I was driving down the road, that there's a little bit of a hang up when I'm turning, but let me show you what I think that it is. And I mean, when you have a 200,000 mile car, crap like this is gonna happen, but there is a bushing, hopefully you guys can hear me with it running. There's a bushing coming out of the steering shaft itself. And I noticed that when we were trying to bleed the system, my son was turning that and that bushing was flopping all around. So obviously that's bad. So probably gonna have to replace that. But I may be better off buying a new steering column, or at least a lower mileage one, because it has the normal, if you have an F body with any miles, chances are you probably have that. And the reason that does that is people use this to get out of the car. Don't do that. Don't use it to get out of the car. But as for today, guys, we are finished. In the next video on this car, we are going to lower the back. Now, I would normally lower the back in this video, but because I'm changing the lower struts, I am not going to be doing that, or the rear shocks, I am not going to be doing that today because you do have to tear some of the interior parts to do that. So in the next video, we will be lowering the back. The springs are relatively simple, could probably do that in about 5 minutes, but because we're replacing the struts, that is a little bit longer of a process. And I'm gonna do some research on that steering column to see if maybe I can buy a new bushing. Chances are I'd probably be better off buying a whole new column because, well, mine's bad. So guys, if you like this video, if you like this project content, I will tell you today, I almost gave up a couple times. I was like, I'm just gonna sell this car, it's just too far gone, but I didn't. Try to keep me motivated. Hit the comments, let me know what you think. If you're not subscribed, guys, go down and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there, make sure you ring that bell icon, that way you're notified every time we drop a new video. And well, stay tuned to see which one of these cars we work on next.